Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. As I've been reading through 1st and 2nd Timothy for the past few weeks, I've been struck by how often the topic of money comes up in both these short letters. Clearly, Paul is very concerned about the love of money and the danger of our preoccupation with the acquisition of wealth. Paul's message is this in both letters: money is dangerous. It can wreck your faith, your life, and destroy your soul. The love of money is a trap. It pulls you into destructive desires that will ultimately destroy your life, your faith, and everyone around you. So this warning about money should come as no surprise to you. It seems obvious, doesn't it? Everyone knows it's bad to be greedy. Every kindergartner knows this. And you don't need to go to church to know this. This idea is all over our culture. Think about Ebenezer Scrooge from the book A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. You know that story. It's a pretty simple lesson. We all love that. We're going to watch it again around Christmas on some form or another. Ebenezer Scrooge loved and hoarded his money, and he loved money so much he had no room left in his heart for people. That's pretty clear. We all know that. Or how about every James Bond villain? They are mostly the same, aren't they? They're all carbon copies of one another. They threaten to blow up the world unless they get lots of money. Villains are evil because they're greedy. That's the theme in every movie we see. So it's obvious. Greed is bad. So do you really need to hear a sermon on this? Well, maybe we do, because Americans are conflicted. I'm not trying to get political here. I'm just making an observation. Half of us voted for a man to be president whose primary claim to fame is that he is rich, and then he spent the last 40 years telling everyone how rich he is. And whether you like Trump or not, I think a lot of us admire rich people or successful people, powerful people. And on some gut level, we know that greed and wealth will corrupt your soul, but we still like these guys who are wealthy, powerful, and rich. And this contradiction may be best captured in the HBO series Breaking Bad, which, while I was preparing the sermon, I realized had its last episode 10 years ago. So I'm reminded how old I am, but I'd recommend it. It's a really, really good, smart show. The show was really popular and says something about the culture we live in. The main character is a guy named Walter White. And it begins with he's a very poor chemistry teacher in the public school system, and he needs a lot of money because he's dying of cancer. And then he becomes really, really rich and powerful by cooking up an extraordinarily pure form of crystal meth. And he's a villain, of course, but throughout the whole season, I couldn't stop watching the show. It's amazing. I mean, he's bad, but I find myself fascinated by him. And I'm almost rooting for a drug dealer because he's trying to be wealthy and powerful. In every episode, he gets more wealthy and powerful, and I can't turn away. I'm supposed to hate this guy, but I kind of admire him. So our culture is caught between two incompatible ideas. On the one hand, we all know greed is wrong. Every first grader will tell you that. But at the same time, you got to admit it. We admire, or at least fascinated by people who are wealthy and powerful. We are attracted to wealth. We are attracted to people who have wealth. But we know greed is bad. Why is that? Why this contradiction in our culture? Why this contradiction in our own being? Well, the explanation for this incoherence is actually right here in these letters from Paul to Timothy, written around 60 AD. It's all still true. It's all here. Paul's warning against the excessive pursuit of wealth and greed was a radical message to the Roman world of his time. When Paul wrote these words, and when Christians began to preach and teach this gospel message to anyone living in the Roman Empire, this gospel message, Paul's letters, would have sounded beyond bonkers. It would have been crazy, completely counterintuitive. It would have sounded to them as if this was anti-human, anti-life, anti-reality, anti-basic common sense. You see, in the Roman Empire during the first century, and actually this is true in almost every culture at every time across the globe throughout all history, but especially Rome, people commonly thought that as a default view of reality, Wealth, prestige, and power were unitary. All three things always came in one package, or at least they were supposed to. It's not supposed to be any other way. Meaning this, if you were wealthy, then obviously you were prestigious and powerful. If you were powerful, then obviously you were prestigious and wealthy. They always came together in a single package. So when Paul tells people to be very cautious about the pursuit and love and desire for wealth and the love of money, what he's really telling them is to reject the pursuit of love, reject the pursuit and the love of prestige and power. Wealth is a stand-in for prestige and power. And again, for someone living in the culture of Rome, and even our culture, this sounds insane. This is bonkers. Because the pursuit of wealth, prestige, and power for a Roman, and for a lot of us as well, is the only reason why you wake up in the morning. And that's the reason why you spend your life pursuing these three things. And what you get from wealth, power, and prestige for the Roman is glory and honor. Again, that is why you live. You wake up in the morning to get wealth, prestige, and power, to get glory and honor as a result of that. And let me elaborate on this. A few years ago, for a series of odd reasons, I was reading Plutarch's Lives of Noble Greeks and Romans. Now, Plutarch was a Roman historian living around the same time as Paul. He was actually probably about 40 years younger than Paul, so he's right up against the culture that Paul's dealing with right now. Now, Plutarch's book, shortened as often just called The Lives, it's a collection of 48 biographies of great Greek and Roman men, or what the Roman culture defined as great. So it's a great little window into what Romans or the classical world defined as greatness, the aspirations we should all live for. And so there are little biographies of men like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Mark Antony, and Brutus, so on and so forth. These names should sound somewhat familiar to you. And Plutarch said that he's not writing a straight history. He was clear in the introduction. I'm not writing flat-out facts. The purpose of my writing is to show the reader the character of these great men. And this book was supposed to be, well, kind of like a Bible. It was supposed to show you how to live. It's instructive. It's a how-to manual. You read this book, and you're supposed to be inspired to think, I want to be great, like these men. They're exemplars, they're role models. And then the book shows you the qualities you need to cultivate in yourself to become that great person that Plutarch has then inspired you to become. This is a great window into the values of the classical world. And again, to achieve greatness is like collecting and hoarding for yourself honor and glory. So as I read through Plutarch's great lives, a pattern is really clear. There's a certain pattern. It's actually rather redundant. In almost all cases, these men are in the military, and they fight ferociously hard. They're smart. They're savvy. They're careful. They're cunning. They're brave. They win the admiration and love of everyone around them. They rise to the level of general, and then they go fight a bunch of fierce barbarians, conquer other nations. And again, they fight with courage and bravery. They win the love and admiration of everyone around them. They win. And by winning, it's not like our military. By winning, they personally get lots and lots of money. You get an amazing reputation, and they enrich themselves. And then they enrich the Roman Empire and make everyone else rich, and then everyone loves them. Then you come back to Rome with gold and slaves, and you get a parade. They build a statue in your honor. They carve your name to the wall, and then you're dead. But at least you got a statue, and that is glory and honor, and your name will be remembered forever, or so they thought. And that's what it means to be a Roman. That's what it means to be a great Roman. Not every Roman was great, but everyone wanted to be great. That was the goal. That's why you woke up in the morning. And it's all tied to wealth. But it's wealth, power, and prestige, glory and honor. They all come together. This classical culture and ethic of greatness and glory and honor, it actually reminds me of a very famous passage from Homer's epic, The Odyssey, about the guy named Odysseus. Odysseus was a hero from the Trojan War. And on his way home in his ship at sea, he encounters a terrible storm. And he's completely certain that he's going to die in a storm in the middle of the sea. I'm going to read a famous passage that describes his feelings and thoughts about this. 3, 4 times blessed, my friends in arms, who died on the plains of Troy those years ago, serving the sons of Atreus to the end. Would to God I die there too, and met my fate that day, the Trojans. Swarms of them hurled at me with bronze spears, fighting over the corpse of proud Achilles. A hero's funeral then, my glory spread by comrades. Now what a wretched death I'm doomed to die. And that's where the passage ends. It's a fictional story, but this is a book that every Roman and Greek read. Again, this is the heroic, epic, national story, and it reveals a lot about the values of the classical world. Odysseus is not afraid of dying. He's afraid of dying without glory or greatness. He is envious of his dead friends who died years ago in battle, being brave. And Odysseus even calls his dead friends blessed because they died heroes. And Odysseus would rather die a hero with everyone watching him than telling stories, telling their friends, and that's what would get passed on for generation upon generation upon generation. And again, he'd be immortalized as a statue forever. But no, this is pathetic and sad. He's going to die at sea, alone, drowning, not fighting an enemy, but drowning. And worst of all, no one's there to record it. No one's going to ever tell everyone how the great Odysseus died. He'll die alone and anonymous. What he really wants to be is immortalized, to live forever in stories. He wants a legacy beyond death because that is his only hope in life. That was a Roman's only hope in life. To have a life beyond your death in legacy, story, glory, and honor and greatness. Why were the Greeks and Romans like this? Or why was pretty much everyone like this? It's not just the Greeks and Romans, it's everyone. This single-minded obsession with wealth and honor and glory was actually rooted in their religion. This is complicated and interesting and weird. The Romans were incredibly religious as a society. I mean, look at Rome, look at the world right now as you go to Europe. There are temples everywhere. They're still around. Everywhere they went, they built temples all over the empire. They weren't small, rinky-dinky temples. They were massive. They put all their wealth in building the most amazing marble stone temples that are still around. They're crumbling. And they had priests. They had priests everywhere. They had rituals. They had worship ceremonies. And they crushed people. When they went to conquer people, they crushed them and they demanded that they worship the way they worship. It wasn't a kind of little thing on the side. They were really religious. However, this is the weird part. The Romans were functionally atheistic. Their lives are filled with religious ritual, a lot of ritual, but it's like they put all the religion in a bucket in the side of their house. It was a very important ritual, but it's there. But the religious bucket stayed in its place and didn't affect the rest of their lives. It's like they knew their gods were real. If you ask a Roman, are the gods real? They would say, of course the gods are real. Yes. And every aspect of their lives were dotted with ritual, but it stayed in a very specific place, and they didn't actually functionally believe and act like their gods are real. It just didn't affect their lives. So if you are functionally atheistic, this is your belief. No matter what your mythology says or tells you about the underworld, about Hades, you act as if it's not real. So when you die, you die. And that's it. You get one shot at life. So if this physical life is all you have, then they had to suck and drink and draw and grab as much joy, pleasure, experience, and status into this life I have right now. Because it's all I got. I get one shot of this, so I'm going to make everything I can make out of this. And since there was nothing after death, the only way they could live beyond their physical death was to be remembered. That's the only hope they have for life beyond this world. Immortality is a statue or your name carved into a wall and the memories and stories and poems about you. That's all they got. So it makes perfect sense they're obsessed with glory and honor, wealth, status, prestige, and experience and pleasure, and living life to the fullest. to max out all your life and all your sensations. If that was your theology, if that was your functional way of looking at the world, that seems to make perfect sense to me. Because that's the closest it could ever live for immortality, success, or significance. I bring up all this stuff about the Romans for two reasons. First, I want to give some historical context of Paul's letters to Timothy. Paul's injunction against greed and the love of money, power, and status is like a sharp dagger stabbing at the heart of Roman culture and values. The gospel invades a culture, society, and individual lives. It radically turns the values and priorities inside out, upside down. It completely reverses all the stuff that we think is common sense and normal, not even worth thinking about. No, those things to be completely reoriented, redone, turned around. I mean, this gospel that goes completely against our natural and our fallen appetites and desires. So second, though, we, you, I, us, in this sanctuary, in this place together right now, we are a lot more like the Romans than we would care to admit. You are not Alexander the Great, and I don't think you have aspirations to conquer the world. But maybe some of you do, but we all have an appetite for wealth, greatness, and glory. Why do we want money? And I think we all want money. I'm assuming that's the case for all of us. Why do we want more money than we have? Most of you have a lot, enough at least. Why? Why money? Money is a means to an end. And forgive me if I don't know you that well, but I would guess for most of us, we have enough. We have more than we need for just food and shelter and clothing. Our basic material needs are met. And yet we want more money. We have enough to live, and maybe a bit more than that, but we want more. So why do we want money? Well, because beyond the basic necessities of life, we want to get shiny, pretty things. Why do we want to buy so many shiny, pretty things and surround ourselves with these things? Because I think deep down inside, we want to live lives that are significant, substantial, meaningful, important. Our lives need to amount to something. I want to be a person of value. So if I make a lot of money, it must mean my work is important. After all, why else would I be getting all this money? And with all this money, I'm going to buy all this stuff to signal to the world, look how much money I have. Look at my value, my worth, my importance. And even more important with money, I'm trying to convince myself that my life is important. My life is valuable. I am substantial. I am meaningful. I mean, every now and then, I think maybe look in the mirror and wonder, is my life worth anything? What's the answer? Or how much is my life worth? So maybe the quick answer is just look at your bank account. Look at your net worth. Look at your look at your tax returns. How much money did you make at the end of the year? And say, that's a lot of money. I guess that's a quick answer. I'm worth that much money. My life must be meaningful. My work must be important. Why else would someone give me all that money for the stuff I do? Maybe you're trying to convince yourself and everyone else around you that you are a meaningful person, that you have worth and value. I remember in college, my friends and I used to sit around the dorms and talk a lot. I remember those conversations. Those were some of my best memories of college, just sitting around the dorm until 3 a.m, talking about stuff. And around my junior and senior year, the conversation turned towards, what are we going to do after we graduate? Do we have to get jobs one day? What are we going to do for money? How are we going to live meaningful lives? And where are we going to live? And I remember an older guy, seemed to be rather worldly, sort of gave us some advice. He said, if you want to be rich, go to Manhattan after you graduate. If you want to be powerful, go to Washington, D.C. If you want to be smart, go to Boston. So 2 weeks ago, I was at a wedding. I like weddings partly because you just meet some interesting people, hopefully. And I met a political consultant who worked in D.C. I told him that story about my college conversation about Boston, about where to live, Boston, smart, D.C. power, New York money. I told him that story and I asked him what he thought of it, and he thought that was true. And I said, look, I mean, if you're like an investment banker in Manhattan, I think to be rather blunt and simple about it, your goal is to accumulate money and capital. But the more you have, the more successful you are. In other words, I mean, if you're an investment banker, I mean, it's pretty clear what your goal in life is, make money, or what your goal of your job is. And the more money you have, the more successful you are. A broke investment banker is not a very successful one, right? So you just accumulate money. It's pretty simple math. Just look how much money you have. That's a lot. So I asked this political guy, and you're a political consultant. You're a lobbyist. You're working in D.C. What do you accumulate in your career? What is a measure of your success? If it's not money, although he does make money, but that's not the goal. How do you measure whether you're good at your job or not? How do you measure whether you're succeeding? What are you accumulating if it's not money, if it's not coin? And he thought for a while. He's a reflective, thoughtful, intelligent guy. And he said, I was surprised by what he said. He said, influence and reputation. What he says is this: in my circle, I'm always meeting people, always going to conferences, always going to cocktail parties, always going to dinners. I'm trying to meet people who will then introduce me to people, to meet more people, to meet more people. And what I'm accumulating, actually, is influence and reputation. He said, I need really influential and respected people to know my name. Then when the issue comes up, they say, Brad should be in all this. We need help. Call Brad. Brad will help us out. Brad's good at this stuff. Brad's really effective. Brad can make things happen. He needs to cultivate that kind of reputation, and that he needs that reputation to be high and broad. Everyone needs to know his name, who matters, and it needs to be a good, powerful reputation. The way a banker accumulates wealth, this guy accumulates respect among important, powerful people, and that translates into political power. He's saying, I use my reputation and my respect, and then leveraging that for power later on. That's what's accumulating. So the banker collects money, he collects reputation and prestige, the things that, how he's perceived in the world. As soon as I graduated from college, I packed everything I owned in the trunk of my 1995 black Nissan Altima. I love that car. And I drove directly to Boston and made a beeline for that city. And that was a long time ago. I'm a professor now. And professors certainly don't accumulate money. That's not what we're about. So I guess Paul's warning about money does not apply to me. Hey, I'm free, I'm holy, I'm awesome. I'm not about money. But I can skip this epistle. Well, not so fast. People like me, academics, professors, we're not that holy. We don't accumulate money or power. It's actually worse. We accumulate, or rather, we hoard, like Scrooge, prestige. I try really, really hard not to do this. But when I'm bad, I do this. I'm tempted to measure and rate my academic peers. I avoid academic conferences for this reason, but I do have to go periodically, and I meet new people all the time. I'm meeting other professors, other academics. And when I meet people, I try not to do this, but I can do this. I try not to, but I can figure out in about 8 minutes where they are in the hierarchy. It's probably subtle about it, but it comes out. So where'd you go to school? Where's your undergrad? Where's your MA? Where's your PhD from? Oh, do you even have a PhD? Oh, interesting. What university do you work for right now? Okay. What rank are you? Assistant, associate, full? Are you tenured yet? Okay. Have you published anything recently? Who published it? Self-published? Oxford? You start figuring this stuff out really quickly, And with all these little metrics, my brain starts making little calculations, and sooner or later, within about 5 or 10 minutes, 8 minutes, I can almost put a red number on their forehead. That's your prestige score. That's your value. And again, I try not to do this. It gets really toxic, but it's not hard to do. It's terrible. It's terrible because for a lot of reasons they're obvious, but it's pragmatically terrible because I then start wondering, well, what's my score? If I'm doing this to you, I know you're doing that to me. Well, what do you think I am? And if I start to think about what they think my number is in that forehead, I'm tempted to start boosting that number up by talking about myself and making them try to respect me. And it's bad. It's a terrible way to be. I try not to do that, but I can't. But I try not to. I've been at my current job for 14 years right now. Before I'm a professor, and every year I'm supposed to turn in a little sheet about, well, what have you done this year, Mike? We pay you. What have you published? What conferences have you gone to? What are you doing with yourself? And I just have to do it to keep my job, so I just write down things, and this is what I've done, and I know that's coming at the end of the year, so I start thinking throughout the whole year, well, what do I got to do this year? I got to do something. I got to publish something. I got to get that number up high a little more, okay? And so every academic, the way most people have something called a resume that's usually about one page, academics have a CV, curriculum vitae. Now, my understanding is resumes have to be about 1 page long, right? The difference between a resume and a CV is CVs can be infinitely long. We have the longer the better. There's no injunction about keeping the CV short. In fact, the CV should be super long. And every year, I've been at my job 14 years, my CV gets longer and longer and longer. Every year, I add some more stuff on it, That's my job. I gotta do stuff. Everything I do is kind of like a merit badge for a Boy Scout. When Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, every time you do something, you get a little badge. You get some more badges, you actually start having to wear a sash to get more badges placed on them. Well, that's what we do. I'm supposed to get more and more stuff, not supposed to stagnate at all. And every time I do something, that little number on my forehead goes up, at least in the eyes of everyone around me, so I think. So I don't seek wealth the way Paul writes about it, but that does not mean I'm a good person or I'm not free from this sin. I'm in danger as much as anyone else, or if not worse, for being greedy. But my greed is for a different kind of coin, and just as bad, if not worse, than practical wealth. It's dangerous because if I give into it, it makes me think I'm a better person than the people around me. And if that's the way I'm thinking, then I'm going to spend the rest of my life, all my energy, accumulating and hoarding these things to save me from the fear and dread that I am worthless. And my life doesn't matter, that I am an insubstantial person. That's my fear. That's my fear. That's my dread. So I work every day to build myself up, to make myself great, to give me glory. And I think that temptation is real. And I think as odd and strange as Odysseus or Julius Caesar seem, those who crave wealth, glory, and honor and greatness want to conquer the world, maybe we're not that different. Maybe in our own way, we're all Odysseus. We're all Julius Caesar. We're all Brutus. So what is your thing? What are you gathering, accumulating, or hoarding? That thing that you collect bit by bit, like Boy Scout badges across your chest. That makes you think you will have a meaningful life. What are you collecting? Are you running away from the fear and dread that your life is meaningless, insubstantial? It's like air. It's like vapor. It won't amount to anything, that you're just sucking up oxygen in this world, and one day you'll be dead, and no one will ever know who you are. What are you collecting that you think will give you value, that makes your number on your forehead high? If it's not power, wealth, and prestige, then what is your coin? Is it physical beauty, the love of those around you, maybe the accomplishments of your children? What is it? I think we all have something that you may not give into completely, but it's there. It's lurking. It's always potentially going to take over your life if you're not careful and you're vigilant. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "Do not gather for yourself riches on earth. Moths and rats can destroy them. Thieves can break in and steal them." I want to read that again. In the Gospel, do not gather for yourself riches on earth. Moths and rats can destroy them. Thieves can break in and steal them. Replace the word riches with your thing, your coin. Do not gather for yourself publications on earth. Do not gather yourself prestige, love, reputation, friends, the admiration of those around you. Whatever it is, you know this to be true. It will fade. it will disappoint. It won't last. It's bad enough that these things will fail to satisfy you, but even worse, these things will ultimately betray you. If you love money, you will be a slave to money. Money won't free you from anxiety. It'll create anxiety, and you'll never have enough. You'll spend the rest of your life trying to make more and more and more and more. You'll just never make enough. And if you crave power, if that's what you want, if that's really what you're after, then you will never feel powerful enough. You'll always feel deeply insecure. And you'll want to crush everyone around you to make sure that you hold on to that power because you're terrified that someone will take it away from you. If you go after knowledge, of which I have some experience with, you will eventually realize how little you know. And you'll spend the rest of your life in anxiety and fear that everyone around you will realize you're an imposter, and you actually don't know that much at all. And so you keep trying to make it the difference to be someone else. Imposter syndrome, that's rampant in my field. God is not trying to deprive us from happiness and pleasure. He's a loving Father, and what he's trying to do is save us from our worst appetites, our own worst tendencies gone amok. He's protecting us from our good and natural desires that have become misdirected and distorted by sin. And these normal desires that are good and God-given, though perverted now, will ultimately come to consume us and destroy the people around us that we love. Why did Odysseus and the Romans crave greatness and glory? Now, why do we want these things? I think we all have a natural good and God-given appetite for these things. Again, the problem is that sin has distorted these normal, basic good appetites. It's not wrong to crave immortality. We all crave immortality. But the wrong way to crave immortality is the way Odysseus and the Romans did it. But that appetite was good because we're made in the image of God. No one wants to die. We don't want to be forgotten. That's a good desire, but it's been twisted and perverted. But the glory that we all want, God wants a different kind of glory for us. He wants us to want glory. But the glory that God wants for us is not the Roman glory, not the worldly glory. Julius Caesar spent 8 years waging a war in Gaul, which is present-day Western Europe. And he won 8-year war. And as a reward for his victory, he was given a ceremony called the Triumphus, or what we call the Triumph. He was given a massive parade through the streets of Rome with his army and all his riches behind him. And the entire city celebrated him and crowned him with a laurel wreath. This is a very definition of glory. Everyone in the city of Rome screaming your name and loving you. After all, you just brought them a ton of wealth. But they love you. Everyone bows down to you. But this glory that Julius Caesar got for himself came at a price. It cost him something. 8 years of war for one thing. But Gaul had a population of 4 million people. Julius Caesar killed and murdered 1 million people of Gaul. And he brought back to Rome another 1 million Gallic people to be slaves for the empire. And they were in chains at the back of his parade. Again, at that moment, everyone loves Julius Caesar and wanted to be like him. Glory and greatness. Except he had to kill or enslave half the population of Gaul to get that kind of glory for himself. God calls us to glory and greatness as well, but of a completely different kind. Like Caesar, Jesus also had a parade of sorts. It was not through the streets of Rome, but on the road to Golgotha. He was not cheered, but he was mocked. And Jesus was also given a crown, not a laurel wreath, but a crown of thorns. And Jesus brought death and slavery in his wake. Jesus did the opposite. He died to free us from slavery to sin, to save us from death and give us immortality. Julius Caesar thought that he would become immortal by doing all this stuff. As you know, he was ultimately stabbed to death by the senators who were jealous of his power which he craved and got, the glory which he craved and got, led to jealousy, and then he was murdered. He was gone. We still remember his name, but his victory was short-lived. But Jesus was glorified by doing the opposite, not getting the crown in Rome, but getting the crown of thorns on Golgotha, not by making himself great. No, he was the greatest man in the world. He was the greatest human being that ever walked the earth. It was Jesus, clearly. He was God. But he denied, he took that glory away. He didn't sink into it. But he made himself the most humble person ever walked the face of the earth. And ironically, that's how Jesus was glorified. Who has been the most glorified human being on the face of the earth? It's got to be Jesus, of course. But how did he get it? He went the opposite route that you think you're supposed to go. He humbled himself. God, again, calls us to greatness. You have an appetite for greatness. We all do. That's not sinful or wrong. That's because we're made in the image of God. God made you to want glory. God made you to want greatness. But we do it the wrong way because we've been perverted by sin. We become great when we imitate Christ, his humility and his mercy, and we seek the good of those around us. And this is a radical reorientation of the ways of the world. I want to end with Jesus' parable in Matthew 20. I'm not going to read it, I'll just tell you the story. You probably know it already. Jesus tells a parable of the workers of the vineyard. The landowner hired workers in the morning, paid them 1 denarii. Then he hired more at noon and paid them 1 denarii. Then he hired more in the evening and paid them 1 denarii. And when they found out at the end of the day that they'd all get paid the same amount, the workers in the morning were outraged. I used to read the story, and I still get outraged. My sympathy is for the morning crew. And I know that Jesus is saying it's wrong for you to sympathize with the morning crew, but I really sympathize with the morning crew. I'm grumpy on their behalf. And I struggle with this parable. I mean, I think we are all naturally offended. All of you should be offended by the story. If you were in the morning crew, you'd be angry. I mean, our instincts, our sense of fairness tells us that you ought to get paid for what you're worth. Those who produce more should get compensated accordingly. That's fair. If they pay me that way at work, I'd be so angry, as all of you would be as well. This is not a parable about how to conduct yourself in business at your work. This is not a parable about how to do negotiation for your salary every couple of years. This is a spiritual parable, not a practical thing about how to make money or how to conduct your business. What is God telling us in this really strange parable? The way that God values people is completely different than the ways of the world. Again, in this world, it's fine and good to get paid fairly for what you produced. But in the kingdom of God, things are different. God does not measure you on your productivity. God does not measure you on your return on investment. God has a completely different standard for us, which actually seems kind of bonkers. But thank God that his standards are not the way of the world, because we would be consumed if it was. We make the mistake of thinking we are worth what we get paid. Let me repeat. We make the mistake of thinking that we are worth what we get paid. I want to repeat that because I really worked on that line. Think about that. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, when you look at your paycheck, when you look at how much money you've made, you think to yourself, yeah, I'm worth that much. I feel good about myself. I'm a meaningful, substantial person. Look at how much money I get paid. But God's ways are completely different. God is saying, I don't measure you that way. I don't measure you on how much work you produce. He pays you this. He pays people whether they work at the end of the day for 1 hour or they've been productive all day. He values people differently than your return on investment, than how much money you've produced. That is to say, you could be this amazing billionaire who does amazing things, and you're important. You got high rank. You could even be a Christian. You're an elder. You're a pastor. Or you could be some poor little widow who no one cares about. She doesn't have much to offer the world, but she faithfully prays every day, goes to church, gives her tithe, gives her offering, and sacrificially gives. Who's producing more return on investment? The rich guy who's powerful, smart, intelligent, or the poor little widow who humbly serves? God says, maybe the widow, maybe I like the widow more. It's not the metric that we use. It's not the CV. It's not the resume. It's not your paycheck. It's now how important you are. It's very tempting to look at your net worth or salary and say, look what I've accumulated in my life. money, power, status, academic degrees, respect. And then we look at ourselves and we think, this is who I am. This is my worth. And if you have a lot, maybe you feel great. If you don't have much, maybe you feel worthless, like you've misspent your life, that you were so disappointed that I had so much potential, I just didn't live up to it. Now look at, I don't have much. Either way, you're wrong. All that matters is what God thinks of you. And it's good to want your life to be of value. But your value is not how the world values you or what you think of yourself. Your value is actually what God thinks of you. So what is your worth in the eyes of God? How much does God value you? Well, here's one metric, here's one measure. You are worth the death of a God. Jesus thought, what's your life worth? My son Jesus will die. That is what your life is worth. So it's not how much money you make. It's not how many academic degrees you have. It's not what you've accomplished. It's that God says, I declare you valuable. And that's ultimately what your value is. And he doesn't ask you in your life, how much are you like Caesar? He wants to know how much are you like Christ. And that is how he measures you. And that is your glory. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you love us, not for the ways we love ourselves, not for